I thought staying would be the easier choice. But the truth is, some promises don't ask for love. They ask for everything else. I didn't stay because I was in love. I stayed because walking away felt heavier than staying. When she looked at me that moment, there was no warmth in her voice, only a quiet certainty that scared me more than anger ever could. She didn't explain. She didn't ask twice. She just said enough for me to understand that whatever choice I made next would follow me for the rest of my life. I wasn't ready for the moment she stopped walking, turned to me and said 3 words that would change everything. We had just left Tony's, string lights, brick walls soft with heat, the last slice folded in her hand, and the South Platte was a ribbon of glass and city lights. She looked small in a way I hadn't expected, as if the river were bigger than any of us, and had a way of making things honest. "I have a son," she said. "He's 5. Those words landed like a cold wind. Not sharp exactly, more like a change in the weather I didn't see coming and suddenly had to dress for. I remember thinking in that thin, slightly embarrassed way you think after a good first date. Okay, that's a thing. I remember the lights on the water. I remember her hands in the pockets of her jacket. I remember my phone buzzing in my pocket, useless. Before Ella, my life was small by design. I'm 27, UI designer, code, mock-ups, coffee on the way to work, and an apartment that rarely stretched beyond the outline of what I needed. After my last breakup, I told myself I was done starting over. I liked routines now. I liked a bed that didn't carry another person's half-worn socks. I liked the soft hum of my dishwasher at night. Stability felt less like giving up and more like survival training after a few too many good intentions that went nowhere. So when Ella swiped right from a quiet Tuesday night and our match turned into a few texts, then a phone call, then a real laugh across the screen, it felt like a small, unexpected crack in my carefully arranged life. Her profile was spare, an elementary school classroom in the background of one photo, a dog in another, a line that read something self-effacing about bad karaoke. Meeting her at Tony's was supposed to be casual. I wanted a slice, a conversation that drifted. I did not want to be rearranged. Tony's had a kind of comfortable chaos, pepperoni steam, a playlist that kept trying and failing to be nostalgic, and the corner table where you could pretend the world was a movie background. She was easier than I'd expected, nervous in the right ways. She spilled water on the table in the first 5 minutes, and we both laughed like it was a good omen. We shared a large margarita and a story about a substitute teacher who once turned a spelling test into a poetry hour. It felt ordinary, which is exactly what I liked about it. We walked along the river afterward, mostly because neither of us wanted the date to end. The air had that clear Colorado cold that feels honest against your face. There were people with scarves and couples with less to say. Ella's voice softened when she told me about her classroom, about a kid who loved building and refused to wear his coat. She told the story like it was a private joke, so when she added, "I have a son. He's 5. Right there between the glow of street lamps and the river riffle, the ordinary shifted. I didn't ask the questions you might expect. I didn't demand names of ex-partners or timelines of custody. I didn't flinch theatrically. I folded the fact into my head and tried to fit it into the box I'd been keeping for new things. But there was a weight behind it that wasn't just logistic. A child meant a life already in motion that included early mornings and small tragedies, soccer practice and scraped knees. It meant someone who had been chosen to be there first, in ways a new boyfriend could never be. It meant she had been living a version of her life that did not wait for me. After that night, I didn't text her for 2 days. I keep replaying that decision in my head even now. I hadn't gone silent because I wanted to manipulate or to make myself seem more valuable. I went quiet because I had to figure out how to hold the image of a 5-year-old in my life. My job is pixels and patterns. I'm used to testing variations before committing. This felt like an interface I couldn't mock up and abandon. It felt permanent in a way I wasn't sure I wanted to be permanent. Work was a background murmur those days. Sam from the design team asked if I wanted to catch a beer on Friday. I said yes, because declining invitations is a bad habit that feeds itself. But between meetings I found myself staring at the calendar and imagining the logistics. Drop-offs, doctor's appointments, the small daily choreography that suddenly belonged to someone else as much as it belonged to me. I imagined mornings with dinosaur sheets, a toothbrush in the wrong place, laundry that was more than my own. She texted me on the third morning, coffee before school drop-off. I typed and deleted 3 different replies, and then wrote something that felt like the least dishonest version of me. We met at a coffee shop that served as neutral ground, late risers, compostable cups, a teacher with a stack of readers' theater scripts. She talked about Finn in the way people talk about something they both love and guard. She said he used to be more trusting, that his dad left when Finn was 2 and didn't fight to stay. She said it quietly, as if it were a fact that belonged to the world and not an invitation to pry. She didn't ask a lot of questions about my dating history. She asked if I liked camping, if I was okay with spaghetti nights, if I could handle a name tag glued to a sweatshirt at a school fundraiser. There were boundaries. She said she wouldn't introduce Finn unless she meant it. That sentence was firm. It was not a test so much as a self-preservation rule. Her voice had an evenness to it when she said it. Protected, not brittle. I told myself I could be honest. I said, I don't know if I'm ready for that. It was the clearest thing I could say. I also said, I'm not going to run. Those 2 lines sat together like 2 hands on a steering wheel. It was true. I didn't have answers for what parenthood would do to me, or to the couch of my apartment, or to my plan for quiet Saturdays. But I could choose to be present. Presence, I was beginning to learn, requires less dramatic heroism and more small commitments. The first meeting with Finn was scheduled at City Park, neutral ground, swings, and a carousel of dogs and toddlers, an unremarkable place for something so important. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, fingers drumming against the steering wheel, Googling dinosaur facts because I convinced myself that knowing the right dinosaur could earn me points. I thought about what 5-year-olds liked, simple sentences, toys that could become vehicles for imagination. I thought about how little I knew about the rituals that make up someone else's life. Finn was smaller than I expected, and bigger in his own way. He wore a dinosaur hoodie with a tear at one sleeve, the kind that tells you a kid has lived in it. He circled my legs like a cautious comet and then asked me without preamble, "Are you going to go away?" The question was clean and merciless. Children don't sandwich their tests with foreplay. He didn't look angry. He looked like a kid who wanted to measure the air. I crouched to his level and said the only honest thing. "No," I said. It was unpolished, but it was true. He nodded as if that was an acceptable manual for interacting with a new person. Then he asked if I liked dinosaurs, which felt like an upgrade. Meeting that first time was a test in tiny movements. When he wanted juice, I learned which straw he preferred. When he wanted to push his swing higher, I found the correct rhythm. I learned how the push of a small body can be perfunctory and also profound. Ella watched sometimes from a distance, reading. She didn't hover, which is different than not noticing. She had a vigilance that had a daily economy, where to spend energy and where to conserve it. The early weeks were a collage of small things stitched together into something that started to feel like a shared life. We had spaghetti that one Thursday, where Finn insisted on using his fork like a tiny pitchfork, scattering sauce in an artistic pattern across the table. I bought a sweater that wasn't mine, an excuse to leave something in the back of my car in case of an emergency hug, and forgot it there until a freezing morning when Finn pointed it out and said, "That's Noah's." We developed a language of small tokens. The toothbrush lived in the bathroom for a week before I tacked it onto my usual shelf. The dinosaur hoodie stayed draped over my couch extra nights because Finn liked to find it as if it were a breadcrumb trail. I learned to say yes more often than I expected. I learned to show up to a school fundraiser that involved glitter and a photo backdrop where Finn posed like a tiny champion. The first time he fell asleep on my shoulder, the room shrank to that warm, lopsided weight. It was not a movie moment. It was a laundry and leftovers, and a hum from the dishwasher moment. It was exactly domestic, and therefore exactly the kind of thing that, stitched together repeatedly, begins to mean something. The cost of being close was subtle. I found less time for random late-night coding sprints. My couch had more living things on it. I moved my plants so they wouldn't get knocked over by a small, enthusiastic dinosaur. I missed a friend's call because Finn's bedtime ritual took longer on that night. None of it felt heavy, in the way people with bad metaphors talk about sacrifice. It felt like a set of recalibrations. I loved small rituals in my old life. I just didn't expect to hand some of them over. There were setbacks. Trust doesn't grow in a straight line. Finn would sometimes pull back for reasons that had nothing to do with me. An argument at school, a night where he woke up scared, and Ella would close off for a day while she managed the fallout. I learned to let silence be a part of the process. There were mornings when I felt like an intruder despite being there every other day. Those were the moments I learned to be patient in ways I hadn't anticipated. Presence isn't proof overnight. It's a ledger of small deposits. One winter afternoon stands out not because of anything dramatic, but because of how ordinary it was. Snow had fallen in a soft, apologetic way that didn't stick much, and the toys in the living room were angled toward a blanket fort behind the couch. Finn had a dinosaur puzzle he refused to finish unless you helped him with the last piece. Ella was in the kitchen, humming while the kettle hissed. I was wiping sauce off a plate and felt a happiness that was quiet and embarrassing. I thought about that river night, about the way a single sentence had opened a door, and felt the odd sensation of having chosen to walk through. There's a building pressure in these moments that people don't always describe well. A sense that your choices are no longer only about you. That can be good. It can also be terrifying. One evening, when Finn had already been asleep for an hour and the house smelled like cinnamon, and the dishwasher hum, Ella asked if I would sit with her at the kitchen table. There were no demands, just 2 mugs and the soft light of the pendant above. "Are you sure?" she asked. It wasn't a question about logistics, it was sharper. She'd watched me for months. She'd seen me pick up toys with an ease that surprised me. She'd seen me show up when plans went sideways. Yet the question was a sincere request for clarity. "Are you sure you want this?" I heard my own life in that question. Measured, precarious, still holding some of the old edges. I could have said something grand. I could have said whatever sounded steady. Instead, I said what I actually felt, which was more complicated. "I'm afraid," I told her, "but I want to try. I don't have the map for all the roads." Saying that was like taking a deep breath. It made the words real instead of declarative. She listened as if she'd been collecting these tiny confessions to see if they fit. Then she did a simple thing that felt enormous. She put her hand over mine. "That's enough," she said. "That's more than enough." Later, she said words I hadn't expected to hear so plainly. "I love you." She didn't make it a performance. She folded it into the space between us with the same pragmatism she used to pack Finn's lunches. It was not an explosion. It was a placement. I said it back because I meant it in a way that had been built by dishwashers and puzzles and early morning pancakes. The words stayed small and true. I stayed because she had a son who needed someone steady. I stayed because the evidence of my staying mattered more than the promise of a grand feeling. She never said those words out loud, the explicit sentence that I now know she felt in her bones. I need someone who will not leave. She never put it to me as an ultimatum. She didn't have to. Her boundaries, her pauses, the way she flinched at vague promises and applauded specific actions, all of that spelled it out without spelling it out. She needed a living proof, not a speech. There were ordinary, stubborn tests. Finn once asked if I would go away on a trip without him. I said no, even though an opportunity had come up for a work conference I could have rationalized attending. Choosing to be present for the weekend's flag football game felt like declaring my priorities in a way that was humbling. Sometimes loyalty looks like missing out on a networking event. Sometimes it looks like showing up to a school play, even though you'd rather have stayed home. These choices were not dramatic. They were accumulation. At work, people noticed the change in my weekend patterns. Sam made a joke once about me becoming domesticated. I laughed and told him that domestication was largely about figuring out where to put a child-sized blanket so it doesn't get stepped on in the dark. Sam nodded, as if that made sense. He asked if I regretted it. I didn't. I told him that there were nights I missed the old, easy solitude, but that solitude had been replaced with a different kind of fullness. What those months taught me was simple and strange. Love is often less the large confession and more the small habit. It is leaving a sweater in the back seat because you know a small body will decide they need it. It is tucking a toothbrush into a new spot because leaving it behind would be awkward and painful. It is being the person who comes home, who sits on the floor to complete a dinosaur puzzle, who learns the route to the school and the exact way Finn likes his pancakes. There was no dramatic showdown with the absent father. That story might be quieter than some listeners expect. He had left when Finn was 2, and by the time we met, there was no fight to recreate. Ella guarded Finn with a skill forged in the small daily decisions of a single parent. Her protection was not theatrical. It was structural, rules about introductions, slow pacing, and a requirement that any person who entered this household would demonstrate a tendency to stay. The apex of the whole thing was not a grand gesture. It was a kitchen conversation after a day of melting snow and someone's socks found under the couch. It was the 5,000th small proof wearing down a well-deserved caution. She asked if I was sure. I said that I had fears, that I had imagined the loss of certain freedoms, that I sometimes missed the loneliness that had become comfortable. But I also said, without theatrical flourish, that I had found I liked this life. I liked being the kind of person a small kid trusted enough to fall asleep on. I liked the rhythm of picking up toys and offering Band-Aids. I liked making a fort and then being the one to tuck it away when it stopped being used. She didn't need promises. She needed presence. I wasn't any kind of savior. I was a person who decided repeatedly to show up. The unseen sentence she maybe wanted or feared to ask was, "Will you be here even when it's messy and ordinary?" I answered that with my actions more than my words. That, I think, is why she never said it out loud. She didn't need to. She had been burned by words before. What she needed was proof she could touch and measure. An extra toothbrush, dinner on the table at 7, the same person in the front seat at the end of the week. We learned to be a family that didn't look like a family in a photograph. It looked like a house with crayons in the sofa creases, and a dinosaur hoodie that hung more nights on the back of a chair, and a dishwasher that hummed at 10 p.m. It looked like a kid who trusted a man enough to ask a terrifying direct question and accept a simple answer. It looked like a woman who let herself be vulnerable in small increments and then saw that vulnerability returned with care. There were seasons to the slow building. The first spring after we started dating in earnest, Finn and I planted a tiny pot of basil on the windowsill that did not survive more than a month. We mourned it slightly and then bought a new plant that had sturdier roots. It was not metaphorical, it was botanical, but it felt like an education in patience and impermanence. The small losses were not ominous. They were part of learning how to care. Sometimes people ask me if my life became less interesting. I tell them no. It became different. There were fewer midnight flights to nowhere and more Saturday mornings with pancakes and Lego negotiations. The texture shifted toward things I didn't know I wanted. A kid asking me to read the same book for the 17th time, and me learning to enjoy the cadence of the story. It sounds tame when I say it like that, but tame can be a gift when you've learned to value it. In the end, the title of this story is precise. I stayed for a reason she never said out loud. She needed someone who wouldn't leave. She needed a steady presence who could be counted on to show up for the small, boring, and relentless moments that make a child feel safe. She needed proof that her life, already rich and whole in its own ways, could be trusted with someone new. She needed a living demonstration that I wasn't going to vanish when it got inconvenient. She wanted the reassurance of consistent action more than the rhetoric of romantic sweeps. I think about that river night sometimes, how small statements can change trajectories, how a sentence like, "I have a son," can feel like an invitation and a boundary at once. How silence can be a time of honest weighing, not an act of cowardice. How love, for me, came to mean deciding to be ordinary in the best sense, present, patient, reliable. If this is resonating with you, or if you've been on the receiving end of a confession that changed everything, leave a comment and tell me about the moment you decided to stay or to leave. I'd like to hear it. We still have arguments that are not novel but are ours. Whose turn it is to take the trash, whether bedtime can slide for a movie night, who tucks in the stuffed animals. We have rituals that are entirely domestic and therefore sacred. Finn lining up his dinosaurs before bed, Ella folding laundry while humming an off-key song, my sneaking a last slice of pizza when no one's looking. The reasons we arrive at love are not always fireworks. Sometimes they are the quiet accumulation of ordinary acts that tell a child over and over that your foot will be on the porch at the end of the afternoon. I don't know how to bake a metaphor into an ending. Life isn't a tidy moral. But I can tell you what it looks like now. Small toys half buried in melting snow by the doorstep, a dinosaur hoodie draped on a chair, a toothbrush that lives in a new spot in my bathroom, and a dishwasher that hums like a steady heartbeat in the evenings. I can tell you that when Finn asks me if I'm going to go away, I still answer, no, and mean it with the kind of conviction that's built by days, not declarations. I still think about that river night, how one sentence can be both an invitation and a warning. She never said the reason out loud, not in a clean, simple sentence. She didn't have to, and maybe that was the hardest part, knowing that some choices don't come with explanations, only consequences. And also, maybe that's why I stayed. Not because I had some heroic certainty, but because I realized that presence is a kind of promise you make over and over again. Some nights the house is quiet except for the dishwasher humming like a steady heartbeat. Finn's dinosaur hoodie hangs on the chair. My toothbrush still lives in that new spot, and I catch myself wondering, was staying strength, or was it the promise that changed me first? Some promises don't end when the story does. They follow you. If you've ever stayed when you weren't sure you could, or left and carried the weight of it, tell me in the comments. What was the reason no one ever said out loud?